Hi, my name is Steve Bear, and I'm the managing partner and founder of the game agency and the training arcade. And today we're going to talk about how to use game design and virtual reality to change employee behavior. So, in this talk, we're going to review a bunch of stuff. First, we're going to talk about the 2020 office and the 2020 classroom. What does it look like today, and how do we use it to our advantage? Then, we're going to talk about the benefits of game based training. We're going to identify the right game for your performance or learning objective. We're going to talk about the benefits of virtual reality training. We're going to talk about how to add gamification to your strategy. And there is a difference between games and gamification. We'll cover that as well. And the last thing we're going to discuss is measuring your success. If you're like me, this is what your home office looks like these days. And I normally have one, two, or three kids at the ready at my feet with me as I'm working. They didn't come today. Your classroom probably looks like this: Zoom, Skype, GoToMeeting, Google Hangout, Microsoft Teams. And while they're very effective in bringing people together, they're not terribly effective in actually engaging learners. So games and simulations are here to help. They help learners connect with your content. They help learners remember content. And we're going to talk to you exactly about why. The answer is they're active learning solutions. On the left-hand side here, you can see retention levels are pretty low with your traditional learning: lectures, articles, books, videos, demos, discussions. That's because those are a passive way of learning. On the right-hand side, however, retention increases significantly when you have someone actually practicing with the content or going as far as teaching it themselves, right? Ultimately, games and VR learning are terrific tools for driving active learning. When you use games, you can actually reinvent the way that people are interacting with each other in a learning experience. They help employees actually collaborate, compete, engage on a different level, and the end result is a much greater community. So I often look at instructor-led training, e-learning, and game or VR learning. And I try to understand what are the benefits and what are the downfalls when it comes to different learning metrics. And by learning metrics, I look at application-based, the cost per learner, how proficient is someone as a result of this training, how confident are they, what level of retention do they have, are they applying, can they apply the skills, and what level of engagement do they have. Ultimately, when you wrap all this together, you can look at the return on investment. So if you start with classroom training, instructor-led training, the applicant base is moderate. But the cost per learner is high. We're either flying people in or we're having people stop what they're doing for the full day just to be in a room or rooms together. While it is expensive, certainly people are getting much more proficient as a result. They can certainly apply these skills as a result, and they're certainly engaged throughout the entire experience because it is a form of active learning. Their confidence is maybe not as high as it could be. And the retention is good, but not necessarily amazing. But I'd say I give this a B overall. You compare that to standard e-learning. And of course, not all e-learning is the same. But the reality is that this gets often lower grades, right? They're not as proficient. They're not as confident. Certainly, they're not as engaged. They often can't apply these skills as a result. So there's a low level of learning, but certainly a low level of cost. There are plenty of places where e-learning can be very, very effective, but the reality is without a combination with others, which we'll talk about momentarily, e-learning is really hard to stand on its own and be successful. So I contrast all this with game-based training and VR training. And not surprisingly, given the topic of this conversation, I give a lot of high scores here. The reality is that game-based training and VR training are all active learning modes of training. So you're going to be able to apply that skill in the workforce because you're applying it in real time in this virtual environment. You certainly are going to be able to obtain proficiency because you're doing it. You're going to be a lot more confident because you're doing it. You're going to retain the information because you're doing it. You will be able to apply this after training because you've done it. And your level of engagement is high because you are hyper-focused on it. Ultimately, the return on investment is high, but it's worth mentioning that the cost is a little bit higher as well. There's no one one-fits-all solution, in my opinion. I believe that it should be a blended approach no matter what. However, I look at games and I look at virtual reality, and I think that they are the jelly to the peanut butter sandwich, right? The peanut butter sandwich being every other form of training, if you will. So when we think about training, I think it's equally important to think about aligning your performance objective or your learning objective with the right type of game or games. So are you trying to get people to recall particular information or categorize something or visualize something, synchronize something, synthesize something, emphasize something, or something else, right? And ultimately, games and VR can be used across all these. When it comes to that last category, branching, empathizing, and plenty of others, which we're going to go over, that's where I feel like VR actually plays its strength. We're going to use Bloom's taxonomy for the purposes of looking through each of these examples. And in doing so, we will be able to identify different levels of human cognition and apply different games accordingly. So we want to start with remembering, understanding, applying, analyzing, evaluating, creating. And in looking at those, we'll be able to identify which games are appropriate for your objective. Recall. Recall is probably the thing that all of us focus on as our first stop, if you will. It's level one. Does a learner ultimately understand this information? Not understand. Does a learner actually remember this information? So let's start there. Can they regurgitate it within days, weeks, or months later? So there are multiple game mechanics that are great for that. Your typical trivia game, where it's just going to have questions like multiple choice, multi-select, image match, text input, polling. And this allows you to certainly just do a quick knowledge check. Does a person know this? You probably want to weave in other things like a point system, a streak system, a leaderboard system, a timer system. That keeps it fun, urgent, and engaging. One certainly step up from your typical trivia game is, a game that is well branded, like Jeopardy. It's a brand that everybody knows and everyone's comfortable with from day one. And you can certainly use videos, you can use images, you can bring it to life. And what's great about both of these mechanics is that they're fantastic for not only individual learning experiences, but they're great for online group play or classroom group play as well. So that starts to take it to a place where everyone's engaging with each other, potentially collaborating, potentially competing, and it keeps it fun and keeps people on their toes. The next game I'm going to show you is also a recall game, but a lot more gamey. So this is a jump game, an endless jumper, where you're weaving together not only the skill of completing different levels, jumping from platform to platform, avoiding obstacles, targeting boosts, but you're also answering questions along the way. So you're having fun and you're proving your knowledge. And if you can do those two things, you're going to keep that person engaged on a much deeper level. Next game, same concept. This is a match 3 game. So if you're familiar with Candy Crush, think about before and throughout levels, having people answer questions and then try to match relevant iconography that ties to your content. Next level, level 2. So maybe someone can recall it, that's great, but can they explain it? If they can use their own words to describe it, discuss it, identify, certainly report it, they really get it, and that's important. So you're looking at a few mechanics here, certainly all familiar with Wheel of Fortune, and another icon IP. But you also have games like Scramble, where you're dragging and dropping different words or different letters to complete different lines of thinking. And ultimately, if you can get someone to spell out a concept, which both of these do, then you understand it. You know that the person in that knowledge check really can communicate it. They can communicate it, they understand it. Another thing is categorizing or ordering. So you see on the left-hand side a pipes game where you have to connect certain things to one another. You want to make sure that you understand where the connections are and what things relate to what. On the right-hand side, you see dragging and dropping in a sorting game into the right category, into the right order. Once again, if you can have someone go through this process, they are communicating it, they're describing it, they're articulating it, and it shows that they understand it. Level 4, learning to distinguish between different parts, right? So this is contrasting, this is differentiating, distinguishing. This might require some examination, some questioning. This game, in my mind, is a terrific one for that. This is called Detective. And it's exactly as it sounds, right? Ultimately, you're giving a variety of cases. This could be used anywhere from Harvard Business School case studies to diagnosing a patient and what ailment they might have. You're going to look at the case. You're going to look at the different lineup of characters or situations. You're going to start to make connections, links between different things, and you're going to identify what is impacting what. And so this is really a deep dive into a business or into a situation, and it requires a decent amount of analysis. But you can't do that analysis until you've truly identified the root cause or the situation. The last level I want to talk about in Bloom's taxonomy is one's being able to argue, defend, support, evaluate. This, in my mind, often is very story-driven. And this is where, while VR certainly can play a role in some of those other categories, deep game simulations and VR are fantastic in this category. We're going to show you a bunch of examples. Who's using this, though? Let's start with that. Lots of companies are, and they're using it for soft skills, right? Google says that 7 out of the 8 most important hiring skills that they have in their 4 walls are soft skills: coaching, communicating, being intuitive, making connections, empathizing, thinking critically, problem solving. And so if you can get someone to do that in a virtual world, you'd want to believe that they can do that in the real world too. So we're going to go through a whole bunch of categories under this umbrella. The first one's listening. So on the left-hand side, think patient care, having doctor-patient conversations, really understanding what's going on with them, really understanding their personal situation, being able to pull information out of them. That requires listening, right? If you understand what the person's going through, you can certainly make some key decisions based on it. On the right-hand side, you see a sales simulation. Here's someone going into a doctor's office and trying to really overcome objectives and really have a conversation to bring them around and talk to them about their particular solution. But it all starts with listening and understanding what problems are they facing. The next category is empathizing. So on the left-hand side, you see management training. On the right-hand side, you see diversity training. These are fantastic. You ultimately are looking at a situation through somebody else's viewpoint, right? You're thinking about who are they and how are you impacting them and how are they impacting others and what are they thinking. And VR is terrific for that because it can be, once again, very story driven, and it can bring it to life, and it puts you in a very isolated experience with that person. Next category, evaluating. So this is fantastic for policing, for certainly armed robbery, for retail training. This is a great way where you can start to look at a situation and figure out, how do I evaluate the other characters, the other situation, and what's going on, and how do I necessarily drive this storyline in a way that is going to be most effective to a positive end result. Furthermore, you're going to see the negative repercussions of your decisions when they're not optimal. Next one's investigating. I think this is equally important, right? When you think about being able to look for all the facts, look at all the nooks and crannies, make sure that you are looking for all the clues, looking for all the feedback, making sure you're trying things along the way, and you're doing it in a timely and accurate fashion. So whether it's fire safety or factory work, you want to make sure that you understand and you're navigating the situation as effectively as you can. VR and certainly game-based training are fantastic for both of these examples. The last one I'm going to show you under this umbrella is diagnosing. So, you've listened, you've certainly, you've investigated, you've certainly empathized, but once you've taken all that in, you kind of make some sort of diagnosis, right? And so whether you're doing that on an engineering side with machinery, you're doing it on the medical side with patients, ultimately you want to be able to take it all in and think about what's out there, and you want to make sure that you are diagnosing the situation and making an assessment accordingly. So it's really thoughtful thinking, if you will. So we've looked at a whole bunch of game types, and we've looked at where you use different game types to align with different learning objectives. The next thing is to think about, when you're creating a game, where do you even start? I often look at these 6 categories. The first one on the top left-hand corner is story arc. There are 2 charts here that you can see as it pertains to how to build a story arc. One is a very big branch. And I do not suggest this. The very big branch in my mind is one, overwhelming for you as a trainer, because it just requires endless thought, different ways of going. But quite honestly, it's equally overwhelming for the learner. Uh, so I often think about this second chart here, which is about giving learners enough choice to go down a wrong path and then course correct them into the right place. But you want to make sure that you're giving them the combination of opportunity to go the route that they want, and at the same time, you want to keep them in a linear fashion where they're going to learn the right way to go. The next category is relevant choices. And I think this is an important one. You want to make sure that it feels authentic, if you will, right? So when you're building out a course, you want to make sure that all questions, all answers feel like they are things that could happen. So I circled on this one, throw coffee on computer. Well, no one's going to do that, right? You don't want anyone to do that. You don't want anyone to be thinking about doing that. So you want to make sure that all the choices are things that you think someone could do. You want to keep every single one to be a good choice, but there is ultimately a best choice. So let's talk about the number of choices. I think it is really important. I always use Netflix as an example. I spend more time with my family navigating all the choices out there than actually watching them, right? So you want to make sure that it feels like a digestible number of choices, 3, 4, probably no more than that, right? Bottom left-hand corner. Let's think about the voice. You want it to feel, once again, authentic. You want it to feel realistic. You want to make sure that if it is written in the voice of a doctor, then it's going to be what that doctor would say. If it's written in the voice of a lawyer, it's what that lawyer is going to say. You want it to feel like they are in a situation that feels absolutely authentic, absolutely realistic to them. Which goes back to useful feedback. You see an image here that says wrong. Wrong is not very useful. Ultimately, wrong is indicative of the fact that they didn't get it right, but it doesn't tell them, A, what's going to happen as a result, or B, how they could have done it better. So you want to make sure that you're using your story arc, your writing, to necessarily drive home the repercussions, positive, negative, or neutral, as a result of what someone says. And if you can build that into your story arc, as opposed to just giving right or wrong answers, you're going to ultimately drive a lot more information into somebody's mind. The last one is visuals. And visuals come in 100 different formats. You might want to be very kitschy. You might want to be very serious. You might want to be very detailed. You might want to be very simplistic. Ultimately, it's about what's right for your culture, what's right for your audience, what's right for your topic, and applying the right visual to it. But this is also not a one solution fits all. I hear often people asking about VR, but I think that many people are in some ways intimidated by it. They're excited and intimidated by it. I want to talk about why you should be thinking about VR. So there are a few stats here that are from a recent PwC study, and I think that they're worth pointing out. One is that VR is 4 times faster to train employees than classroom training. And that is, you're going to hear a theme here, because people are very isolated with their goggles in a situation, and they are required to really engage on a much deeper level. 2, 275%. Employees are 275% more confident in their ability to apply the skill after VR training. Once again, because they've done it in a very realistic, very isolated experience where they've had to try it, and they've had to either fail and learn what went wrong, or succeed based on knowing it to begin with. 3, employees feel 3.75% times more emotionally connected to the content than they are in the classroom learning. And what does this mean? When you have a headset around you and you are actually participating with that content, and there's no distractions around you, you're going to feel emotionally connected. So if you remember that management training example, I've heard many people say after taking that training that they have cried, that they've had to take their headset off because they've been so jostled. The reality is that if you can make it a realistic experience and you can make it an emotionally engaging experience, once again, positive or negative, you're gonna tug on people's emotions, and that is really critical. And ultimately, because people have goggles around their eyes and they're focused and they don't have the distractions around them, they are 4 times more focused than their e-learning peers. The other question I get asked about VR learning is expense. And it is an expensive solution. And of course, all VR is not the same. But in this same study, they talk about how once you hit about 375 learners, VR training achieves a cost parity to classroom training. So, classroom training is expensive because you're bringing people in, but it lacks certainly a lot of the stats that are above here. Okay, so we've talked about lots of stuff. We've talked about games. We've talked about mapping your games to different learning objectives. We've talked about VR and why VR. Let's talk about different modes of play. So I'm showing you here three. The first one is solo play. That is probably something that we're all very familiar with, right? Competing with oneself to be their personal best, right? And that's fantastic because that is taking someone's intrinsic motivation into account and they're pushing them to be as good as they can be. The next one's head-to-head. So challenging your colleagues and certainly going for leaderboard dominance, right? Make this a place that you want not only be your best, but you want to be better than your peers. And if you can tug on someone's motivation to compete, fantastic. The last one's team play. And this one's not just about competition, it's about collaboration. It's about pushing each other, working as a group to have your best score that you can have, and taking that score and ultimately trying to dominate your peers group to group. So all fantastic. And I think, much like I talk about a blend of instructional-led training, e-learning, and game-based or VR simulations, same thing here. I think if you can blend solo learning, head-to-head, and team play, you are doing yourself a great service. So we've talked about games. Let's talk about gamification. And there is a distinction between the two. So if you're not familiar with gamification, it is using points, competitions, rewards, badges, all the different elements that come with games and applying it to your day-to-day environment. And in this case, we're talking about learning in particular. When you do that, you are able to take basically your things, your competition, your status, your incentives, your rewards, you push it through someone's brain. There's a dopamine release. It's fun, it's engaging, it's motivational, and quite honestly, it's much more effective because you are driving that information, that retention into someone's brain. So A+. Let's talk about when you're building a gamification strategy, what should it look like? And I think it's important to think about who is your audience. Most organizations have, I'd say, 4 different categories of audiences: your socializer, your free spirit, your achiever, and your philanthropist. So on the socializer side, you might want to tap into their relationships with each other, or their social status, or their desire to collaborate or compete with each other. On the free spirit side, you might want to think about customizing things. Let them play around with it to make sure that it feels like it's theirs. Let them unlock different content. Let them go down different branches. Let them find Easter eggs, surprises along the way. For your achiever, you want to make sure that you're giving them levels or quests. There's competition. They can master it, and they can feel really good about themselves for doing so. And ultimately, your philanthropist, there's gifting, there's social status, there's collaboration, there's purpose. And I think if you can think about how to appeal to each of these categories, you're going to build an amazing campaign. Ultimately, your training should not just be a stop, right? It should not just be a pit stop. It should be part of a much larger learning journey. And if you can create a path for learners to go down, much like the game of life, and reward them for completing one milestone after another, you're going to incentivize them and motivate them to keep going. And there's nothing more that you want with training, or that I want with training, than to have a motivated learner. That comes with lots of different things, right? Great content, great storylines, but also different incentives along the way. That might be badges, that might be certificates, but you want to recognize the different achievements that someone is doing. And in doing so, you're going to ultimately motivate them to keep doing it. Think about also showing graphically where people are, right? So the best way is to quantify that in leaderboards. It certainly motivates someone's intrinsic motivation to do the best that they can and to beat their colleagues. They want to have public recognition. And quite honestly, it gives you tons of data to come back to understand who's over and under indexing on your learning. The last thing you want to think about is rewarding. And this is really goes hand in hand with gameplay. There's the intrinsic motivation of just accomplishing something. There's the extrinsic motivation of getting something for what you've accomplished. And rewards come in all shapes and sizes. They could be gift cards, pizza parties, lunch with the boss, a day off or an advantage on the next level. It could be anything. But think about what's right for your culture and what is going to be right for your audience. The last thing to think about is data. Data is critical. So it's not just about having fun. It's not just about incentivizing, but it's also about really understanding and analyzing on the backside, what do we know about our learners, right? So with most training, you're not going to get this much data. You're certainly going to know about the number of users, you know how many sessions, you know about the amount of time they spent, but once it comes down to accuracy, certainly behavioral trends, knowledge gaps, behavioral trends is, I think, where the biggest value is. And this is where VR and game-based training really plays a big role. You can certainly start to understand personas. You can understand, who is this person? Where do they belong in my organization? What skills do they excel in? And where are their weaknesses? Where do I need to upskill them? Where do I need to transfer them? And the more that you can take this data, the more powerful your training is going to be in the long run for the success of your company. So the last thing I want to look at is within the gamification strategy is, how do you bring it all together? It's important to think about not just games, but also to think about, how do you wrap that all together? How do you focus on someone's accomplishments, their achievements, if you will? How do you build the leaderboard so you can look game by game or at a global level? How do you allow people to not only play for themselves, but also compete with their coworkers or work as teams to really excel? How do you get them to come back over and over again? What types of achievements are going to be relevant for them? Is it based on being the best they can? Is it about coming back regularly? So you want to think about all these things when it comes to your gamification strategy. And the nice thing is that you can build any games into a platform like this. What you happen to be looking at is a platform we have called Arcades and the Training Arcade. But you can put any content into this platform. And that's what gets really exciting, is making it the right content and the right campaign for your organization. So as Steve Urkel once said, did I do that? We just did that. We did a bunch of stuff. We looked at the benefits of game-based training. We looked at choosing the right game for your learning and performance objective. We identified the benefits of virtual reality training and when to use it. We talked about how to measure success, and we also talked about how to add gamification. So for more information, come to thegameagency.com or come to thetrainingarcade.com. But thanks for tuning in.